This is one of my favorite patches of bamboo to gather bow staves from. Every stand of bamboo is different, and only experience will tell you whether the wood is good enough for a high-performance bow or not. But in general, you're looking for a bamboo that has at least a 4-inch diameter and a relatively consistent wall thickness. You want to gather the stalks that are the most mature, which you can usually tell by the darkness of the wood and how many aerial roots there are going up the nodes. And this patch has plenty to choose from. I really like using these silky saws for cutting in the bamboo because the blade is skinny enough to get in between the stalks of bamboo, and they're made out of really strong steel so they don't break as easily when they get pinched, which is totally inevitable. In fact, pretty much every time I do this, I end up cutting the piece of wood at the top before I finish cutting it at the bottom so that it doesn't pinch the blade as much and it comes loose more easily. I'm looking for a piece of wood that is going to be as tall as standing it up so it comes to my nose. And that's, for me, generally around 62, 63 inches. You can see the base of this one is about 1.5 inches thick, and at the thin end it gets down to about 3/4 of an inch thick. I wouldn't take it and use it for a bow if it got any skinnier than that. So next I'm going to split the wood, and I like to split the wood in the direction that it grows. So from the thick end towards the thin end. I find it's easier to keep the split in the middle when you split it that way as opposed to in the other direction. So in a survival situation, I would split this down and dry it out by the fire, but I have time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split these down further and dry them for a couple weeks, and this is what it looks like after drying for 2 weeks. This one's about 2 inches wide, and the finished dimensions of the bow is probably going to be about 1.75 inches to 1.5 inches wide when I'm done with it. And you can see that it has a really nice profile when you look down the length of it. So drying it more slowly just makes the wood last a little bit longer. And one of the things we have to contend with here in the Caribbean is there's lots of termites. One of the ways that you can make the wood more resistant to the termites is to fire cure it. And so if I were working with green wood, I could dry it by the fire and it would get fire cured while I dried it. But in this instance, I'm just fire curing it for it to have more longevity. And I like to pass it right through the flames just quickly enough so that it doesn't burn and char it all, and I'm just looking for a color change in the wood, which you can see here, the difference between the light and the dark wood. So I actually spent more time fire curing this than I did making the bow, and you're going to see most of the process right here. So you can see that I am using a machete for most of the work here, and I'm not chopping at the piece of bamboo, I'm sliding the machete down the wood. And when I want it to cut more, I angle the blade so that it's facing into the wood more. And that causes the blade to bite. Once I get the blade to bite, then I flatten the blade a little bit more to just split the wood off down the length of it. Now here you see me removing just a little bit off of the thin end. That's all I need to do on the thinner end of this piece of bamboo because it's naturally tapering at a good rate and it doesn't end up needing much tiller. Most of the work that I'm doing is on this side of the piece of wood, which is the thicker end. And again, I'm just using that technique where I'm sliding the machete along the length of the wood and just turning the angle of the blade towards the wood more when I want it to take off more wood, flattening it out when I just want to carve the wood off on the little notch that I've already started. So I'm trying to get the most poundage that I can out of this piece of wood, and it feels a little bit lighter than I'd prefer it for it to be. So instead of chasing down a perfect tiller, I'm just going to get this thing so that both sides are bending the same amount. Both limbs are bending the same amount. And then I'm going to string it up. So you can see me carving off some of the rougher gouges that I made with a knife, and most of the work is being done with my thumb here. My right hand is actually restricting the blade from moving too much so that I can keep from gouging the piece of wood. All I'm doing is getting the two sides to flex the same, and then right here you see me making the tips, carving down the tips. Once I'm done with all the carving, I use my machete at a 90-degree angle to the piece of bamboo to scrape off all the carving marks and all of the worst looking marks left by the tools. So altogether, the actual tillering of this bow took me about 35 minutes, and the fire curing took me about an hour and a half. Here you can see me carving in the notches. The only thing with when you're carving in the notches, especially on a piece of bamboo, is to be careful not to put too much pressure towards the end of the notches so that you don't split out the wood. I really like using a knife to make the nocks in my bow because it just feels a little bit more hands-on than a file sometimes. Here you can see me rubbing the piece of bamboo down with some neem salve. And again, that neem is just to help keep the insects off of it. Since I'm planning on getting a lighter poundage bow out of this, here goes nothing. This is my first stringing of the bow. Because I'm expecting it to be lighter poundage than I'd prefer, I want this thing to last as long as possible so that I can maybe cut it down a little bit later and get some more poundage out of it. And that is the first full draw, and it's not really making too much noise. It's not the prettiest tiller in the world, but if I tiller it down any more, it's going to get lighter than I'd prefer for it to be. I have gotten 50-pound bows out of this stand of bamboo before, but this one does not feel like it's in the 50-pound range. So you can see that the outer surface of the bamboo is facing towards me in the way I'm drawing this back. And that's because of the characteristics of the bamboo. And you can see here we're right in at 42 pounds of draw weight. So bamboo does tension really well, but it does compression pretty poorly. And the outer surface of the bamboo does compression slightly better than the inner surface of the bamboo. So this will get me extra poundage out of it, even though it won't last quite as long. It's really easy to like my bow when you don't know what you're looking at, kid. And again, this tiller isn't perfect, but I just wanted to get the most poundage that I could out of this piece of wood. Came out super pretty, and hopefully when I cut it down, or maybe back it, or do something with it to bring the poundage up, hopefully it'll hold together, but fun project. Thanks for watching.